panic. I usually cut off the first few seconds anyway, because it usually takes a little bit of time for it to sync up. All right.
I notice you are now a little bit out of focus on your camera.
Oh, thank you. Well, usually the internet, because it's syncing up, the quality goes down a little bit. So anyway, folks, I am joined by a very special guest, Arthur Harman. Is that how you pronounce? It's not like Haman or any hidden accent in there, or it's just Harman.
No, yeah.
So he calls himself Art, and I like that name because it puts the accent on the art in his personality. So let's talk a little bit about who you are. I believe you spent 30 years on the Hill. You've worked with people such as Senator Mike Lee. You've are basically the person who took down the notorious Gang of Eight. But first, before we get into all that, who are you? Where are you from? What brought you to where you are now?
Well, I'm thanks, and Alex, delighted to be on the show with you. You do a fun and informative show, so I'm glad to be part of that. And but who am I? Well, I'm one of the few people, and I'll introduce myself this way here in Washington D.C. I'll say I'm one of the few people you'll meet who is actually born in the city, grew up in the city, and so forth. And there's not very many of us. And in fact, we'll have reunions and we'll rent a phone booth for the occasion. So everybody's got plenty of elbow.
Oh, that sounds like a lot of rent. A whole phone booth for DC. Oh my word, you must be like a multi-billionaire to afford that kind of rent.
Well, we want to have everybody have plenty of elbow room.
So in the green room, you were talking a little bit about growing up in Italy and how your father was a bit of a involved in politics. But how does that translate to you? How does Italy and your father take you to where you are now?
Well, there were sort of two transformative events. When I was fairly young, quite young, we lived in England for a year, and that gave me a passion for travel, learning other cultures, adventure, things like that. And to this day, that holds. I've been to, I don't know, 40 countries or more, and been behind the Iron Curtain in the Soviet era. I was there at the time the Berlin Wall came down, and I stood in the footsteps of the freedom activists in Tiananmen Square several years ago. And when we get into China and so forth, I'll tell you more about that. I stood on the bloody stairs of the church in Timisoara, Romania, where the only bloodshed during the fall of the Soviet Empire occurred, and that's when Ceausescu's troops fired on innocent citizens.
Oh, you were present. You were there.
No, not at that time, but
okay.
6 months later, I was there.
Oh wow! So I'd imagine all those things would heavily contribute to your current political leanings in some way or another, right?
Very much so. And you mentioned Italy because that was a transformative moment for me, because growing up, my dad was a Republican, and we were kind of chat and so forth, and so it influenced my thinking and so forth. But it was an interest. My greater interest was in the sciences, and my dad, being a physicist, physics, engineering, interested me a lot. And so, he taught me how to repair radios and electric things, how to build stuff. Truly a great man. And he even brought back on our trip to England a British car that nobody in America knew how to work on. So he learned, and I learned with him. And so to this day, I'll fix up and hot rod and do other fun things with cars. So I'm a bit of a car guy too. But living in Italy was really weird because here I am, I'm an American. What I know is what I've read and studied and heard about, say, the Soviet Union and communism. Okay, so now I'm in Italy. This is my senior year in high school. And I'm chatting with the local kids in the village where we were. And they were all communists because at this time, the Communist Party of Italy was very strong. And they ran, we were near Florence. And so they ran that area. The mayor was a communist of Florence. And
Not even a socialist, just full on
no, oh,
communist.
outright communist. And there would be posters everywhere, Communist Party
So,
and
out of interest, was there like a decent, like foil or just somebody there to even give counterpoints, or just no sort of alternative opinion existed? It was just it was like DC. They all are communist. It's just
yes,
like
that's a beautiful way. Walk down the street here in DC and wear a MAGA hat, and 9 out of 10 people are probably going to give you a bit of grief about it. If I go into a restaurant, I probably don't want to say, hey guys, I'm a MAGA guy. Give me your best on your menu.
they might
And
spit in that food.
like Jesse Jackson admitted to doing. So uh, it was just so accepted. So I was the opposition. I was the only guy giving those village kids an alternative view of what they had grown up and learned.
Did you ever feel like you were going to like be physically under threat? I mean, did they, give you a hard time? Was it sort of like, did they kind of appreciate that sort of other perspective? Did they?
Oh yeah, yeah, they did, and we had many a fun debate.
Interesting. So it's
And
not like today where you go to a college campus, Berkeley, and you say, "Hey, free markets," or "Hey, let's be pro-life," maybe, and then they beat you up or whatever. It's not. It wasn't like that.
well, no, no, and that is that's something maybe we can discuss a little bit later. How did that dehumanizing of opponents come about? Basically, one word: crystal knocked. The left and the media are following the same exact psychological campaign to dehumanize Trump supporters and anyone to the right of Bernie Sanders, as as was used to dehumanize Jews. Why? Because then, if you dehumanize them, just like dehumanizing the fetus, oh, it's a tissue mass, or it's not alive until 5, 10, 20, 30 minutes after it's been born, depending on whether you're the governor of Virginia or not.
Right.
And so uh, uh, this was the world then, that you could talk to somebody. And so we just had good old fun debates about politics. And in Italy, so I found a few common things. Number one, all they knew was what was in the left-wing media about communism, and what they had learned through the way that the Communist Party had infiltrated Italian society at the time, so I'll get to in a sec. It's kind of a little interesting. And but the funniest moment was when one of the kids said, "Oh, the communists make the trains run on time." Now, that was a phrase used about Mussolini. So you
Interesting.
actually had kids of that time using a Mussolini term, fascist, to describe in a positive way their communist um, overlords. And so I was sort of slightly stunned, knowing a little bit about history and so forth. This is high school and so forth. So, um, but but what the way they would uh, sort of propagandize youth was disturbing. In Italy, sort of social life revolves around the bars. We would call them cafes. They're more like a French cafe, but they're all called bars. And that's where everyone hangs out. So you see the old and the young and everyone in between. They stop for a cappuccino. They stop for something to drink.
They're
Yeah,
Italian, so this is how they talk, you
that's
know.
the how. Exactly. You got it. And but the bars usually, many times, had a political component. So they were affiliated directly with the party. So there was the in our town, there was the Social Democrat bar, there was the Christian Democrat bar, there was the Republican Party bar. They actually had a Republican Party. And I'm sitting here knocking your microphone again. Uh, and then there was always the Casa del Popolo, or as we called it, the Commie Bar, which was run by the Communist Party. So imagine if you had Bernie Sanders actually endorsing and running a bar in DC, in Virginia, in your hometown. And you would go in and there's pictures of
You want
Bernie
some
all
Scotch on the rocks? Well, I got all the rocks.
you got it.
We got Bloody Marys too, if you want that. Oh, okay. So, fast forwarding a little bit to where I know I'm skipping a bit, but we are getting pressed. I love hearing about your time in Italy, but your time on the Hill, working in policy and all that stuff. This is the kind of the hook that got me when we met at CPAC. Wow, this guy's really cool. You talked a lot about the amnesty bill that the Gang of Eight was going to pass. For those who do not know, it effectively gave undocumented uh, undocumented aliens a very efficient pathway to citizenship. Correct?
Exactly. Yeah. This was something that the left had been, and the rhinos had been pushing for years. And about every 3 or 4 years, they would make another big, big push. And so for years, I was a policy guy at a conservative group called Conservative Caucus, and so we would fire up the troops and we would get the grassroots out to defeat the latest and greatest amnesty bill. And so in 2013, then the Gang of Eight, which was 8 Republicans plus all the Democrats, ganged up and passed in the Senate their latest and really the final push for amnesty ever. Um, because there's defeated and because now we have Trump where it would go nowhere. But
Because people now care about this issue and they are realize, oh, this kind of is a big deal.
yeah, yeah, and a million plus illegals might even be 1.5 million storming the border this year.
I mean, estimates vary to something like there's 8 million or 11 million illegal
That's
aliens.
funny because that's like Al Gore saying in 19 fill in the blank or 20 fill in the blank, the world will end, the ice caps will have melted. Oh, I
We're all
flew over the Arctic in 2014, which was one of his years, and I saw a lot of ice.
well, but getting to this, I mean, it really is kind of the end of conservatives, or the self-perpetuation of the Democrat Party, because the undocumented immigrants, they are probably even more loyal than the African American community to the Democrats, at least of
Yeah,
now. So, I mean, if they were to get instant citizenship, and they keep, and they're obviously going to keep coming faster over the border, that is the self-perpetuation of the Democratic Party for time and forever. They will always have power if
yeah.
some bill like that passed. So, how exactly did you stop it?
Well, I'm working for not a freshman. He had Congressman Stockman had served in the '90s for one term, and then in a redistricting thing challenge in court, he got knocked out. So then he ran again in 2012 and won. Um, and so we're effectively in a freshman office, and it shouldn't have been us, and that's the crying shame of it. But it shows what one person can do, because the setup was it had passed in the Senate. You had 8 Republicans. There were a group of rhinos in the House too, including Boehner. Boehner was pro-amnesty, was as
Really?
Speaker. Yeah. And so everyone was looking at one of 2 strategies he would use to get it through the House. Number one is he would violate the so-called Hastert rule from Speaker Hastert, where no bill would be brought up by a Republican speaker that didn't have a majority of Republican votes, and just bring it up on the floor and rely on all the Democrats and the handful of rhinos to pass it. Number two, he would take a House bill on border security and conference in a conference committee with that and the amnesty bill. They would replace the contents of the border security bill
Ah,
and motion to replace, and then there would be a House vote, which would on the final, because he would have stacked the conference committee with his people, and then there would be a final floor vote where all the Democrats and the rhinos, they pass it. It goes to Obama's desk. The media would, of course, never report it as a Republican bill. So all the Republicans thinking, oh, if only we support amnesty, then all the people affected will be on our side because we did it. No, they would never hear that. All they would hear is Obama's victory, and a few recalcitrant Republicans switch sides, but it would be a non-story. They would get all the credit. So
mhm.
just one night, I'm racking my mind. We've got this damn thing. It's going to become law the moment Boehner strikes. And I'm saying, how are we going to stop this?
Yeah.
Okay, so Basic Constitution 101, Origination Clause. Amen. So the Origination Clause says that all bills containing revenue must originate in the House of Representatives. And so it's like, bingo, this bill is full of taxes, fines, and fees.
So how in the world, first of all, I want to know, how could all these, elites who have been there for, these swamp monsters who have been here for decades miss that? How do you like craft policy your whole career, with this supposedly being your framework and, the basis? How do
Yeah.
you miss that?
It boggles me to this day because we actually had plenty of good people who had knew all the rules on our side, and yet this thing is just sitting there and going to be advanced. So the next morning, me and my boss sit down, and he loves the idea. I draft up a letter that then we get signed by a bunch of members, and then deliver it um, to Chairman Camp of the House Ways and Means Committee, and we also sent a copy to Boehner. And as we went into his office, the lawyers will come in and say you're served if they have this, something for you. And so we said, you've been blue slipped, because that's the term in Congress for pulling this. And so it was epic. And the next morning, Chairman Camp tweets out that the bill is dead, it violates the Constitution, and will not be brought up. So,
Literally if it was the right day, it would be a Christmas miracle. I mean, that is really That really, I mean, that's really scary when, I mean, you probably think about this all the time. I don't know about our listeners, but we were that close to losing America.
Right. Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
Literally inches away. We luckily the rhino the swamp monsters they forgot to read the rule book. Kind of like in the 2016 election, they forgot. No, it's not the popular vote; it's the electoral call. You know, they keep forgetting how the
Yeah.
rules work. That's really,
they
but
they do, and at times it may be strategic that they think they can get away with it. The Obamacare bill was done exactly the same way. It was passed in the Senate, but they then pulled what Boehner wanted to pull. They with the Democrat House, it was a no-brainer. But they then did, if I recall correctly, a motion to replace, and they took a House bill and they replaced it with a Senate bill, and so then
but the
then
difference
they
was that the Supreme Court ruled on that one, and they gave it the green light, right?
yes, yeah, yeah. So, but it shows one person can make a difference. One person can.
If you know the rules.
Yes, yes. Everyone out there, read the Constitution.
Please,
That's the rule
absolutely.
book.
Now, I do want to get into a little bit more policy that you may not know just by reading the Constitution, specifically your bread and butter, which being space. So I can't wait to talk more about that, folks. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much, Mr. Harmon, for coming on. Really appreciate it. This was
What a
great.
pleasure. It's fun.
Oh, absolutely.